Hi folks, it's just gone past 7 o'clock here in Brisbane, Queensland. I'd like to welcome our sister states, New South Wales, Victoria, Tasmania and ACT, all on the same time zone. 9 o'clock in our friends over there in New Zealand, 10 o'clock in the morning in the UK. And our guest is sitting right above me. He's sitting above Julia, and his name is Alex. He's here in Brisbane. We've been listening in the green room before the show, and got to take our hats off to this guy. He deserves the Order of Australia. So I'll pass it back to Julia to take it over. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeff. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Dreaming the New Dream. Yes, we have Alex McDonald with us today. He's Chief Social Entrepreneur for a company called White Box Enterprises, which has the very great mission of trying to create as many jobs as possible for disadvantaged young Australians. Alex has extensive experience in working in game-changing type of businesses and industries. I certainly know of the first one that he was involved in on the international field was the Body Shop, which was set up in the UK and was the first company to emphasize listening to consumers, the youth, not wanting to buy cosmetics that had been animal tested. And Alex was the director and very much involved in bringing that, the senior executive of that in Australia, as well as working with the homeless, setting up the Big Issue, and we'll get Alex to talk about that, and lots of other new ventures since then. So welcome, Alex, onto our show.
Thanks, Julia. Thanks, Jeff. And hi, everybody out there, wherever you're listening from. I'm actually in a place called Pomona, which is in the Noosa hinterland.
Nice place.
Yeah, it's a lovely place. And it's funny, but Pomona is actually the Greek goddess of fruit trees and orchards. And I happen to, in my spare time, grow avocados. So there you go.
All right.
Where you live and what you do match. But I know that's not what we're here to talk about today, but I just thought that was a little bit of interest about the Noosa hinterland rather than beaches and surf and all that sort of thing.
Well, it's an interesting mountain you got there too, isn't it?
Yep, Mount Karura. So yeah, everyone runs up it, but I prefer to rather look at it.
That's great. So Alex, you're currently the Chief Social Entrepreneur for White Box Enterprises, and I don't actually know what a Chief Social Entrepreneur is. Can you enlighten me?
Well, we can, I suppose the best way to enlighten you is talk about what do we do. And, my role within White Box, and the company's called White Box for a simple reason that the white box is a type of eucalypt, and it's one of the biggest pollinators in eucalypt forests. And one of the things that we aim to do is pollinate the community with new ideas about what business is and what it can do and how it works and who's involved and that sort of thing. So that's the reason for the name White Box. But my role in that is actually to investigate and look at what new business opportunities are there that fit around a paradigm of what we call a social enterprise. In other words, it's an enterprise with a social mission, but it's an enterprise as well that is economically sustainable for those people who either fund it or are part of it, but creates as much social good as it can. So my job in White Box is to look at what options are there in terms of new businesses. How do we structure them as businesses for social good and make them happen? And I'm happy to talk to some of the businesses we're working with, or indeed not just working with, but have established ourselves. So one of the things we do in White Box is support those social businesses that need advice, that may need or looking at different ways of funding themselves, etc., as well as establishing businesses themselves out of great concepts. So it's a pretty broad role, and I enjoy it immensely. It builds on the work that I've been doing for the last 25 years anyway, through either the body shop or other positions that I've been involved with philanthropic foundations, etc. So, yeah, it keeps me busy, but it's about how to be an entrepreneur, but an entrepreneur building social business or social enterprise rather than your mainstream, purely for-profit businesses. And I think if we all sat back at the moment with COVID, etc., and there's a real thing going around at the moment about with COVID and everything slowing down and people reflecting on, what is important, there's a whole movement around building back better. How do we build back business that's better than before? People are starting to realise that that business has an important role other than, generating profits for individuals or organisations or whatever. So we're right in the box seat of how do we build back better by building social enterprise.
If I take
I understand that at the moment. Oh, sorry, Jeff, go on.
I take you back. I mean, in the early days of Australia and New Zealand, suppliers, farmers, or whatever, got together and they set up cooperatives, and where there's a cooperative venture put in place where they actually shared and distributed not only their goods and services but the profits. So we've actually seen that those cooperatives get corporatized. Is there a way that you've sort of worked out that you can overcome the corporatization of cooperatives, which were really set on those same principles that you're talking about now?
Yes, we talk about this issue quite a lot. I mean, I think it's really interesting when you talk about corporatized. If you think about AMP was the last big cooperative, if you like, in Australia that was corporatized and listed on the stock exchange. And it's been really interesting because when AMP was first established, it was established for the members, for the benefit of the members. And when it became an ASX listed company, it's really interesting on the position they find themselves in now, where it seems like there's been some mission drift, if you like, and that profits have trumpeted or triumphed somewhat over the mission of the organisation that was first established. And I think one of the things that we do, whether we're trying to support organisations by finding social investment for them, or setting up organisations ourselves, one of the things we like to do is write into the corporate articles what we call a mission lock, which is basically saying, what is the purpose of the business? What are we here for, and what is this business established for? And that mission lock is actually put in the articles of association. One of the businesses that we've established through Whitebox that I've been very instrumental in making happen, as well as a whole team of people, nothing ever happens by one person generally, is a company called Australian Spatial Analytics. This company is established as a social enterprise, and it has a real purpose of creating a business that works in the digital world, but its mission lock is to do that by employing people on the autism spectrum. And that influences everything we do and all the decisions we make about that business, what contracts we do, how much we charge, how we support staff, what do we do with turnover, etc. We've been in operation now for a year, and that business, Jeff, has a mission lock. So even if we grew exponentially and took over, a large slice of the digital analytics field, we would still be locked into the purpose of why the business exists. So that's one of the strategies we use to make sure we don't get that drift. We have a mission lock to prevent mission drift.
Right. Julia?
Yeah, I was actually quite interested in the digital analytics space, and I think Andrew Forrest actually mentioned it in one of his lectures, that he'd done a PhD on ocean health, and he was quite aghast to find that as part of his PhD he had to sit there and count within cubic meters what the population density was of whatever had been photographed at that time. He thought it was an utter waste of his time, and he actually proposed that one of the opportunities would be to use artificial intelligence to be analysing that kind of data rather than using.
Yeah, and there is a lot of AI that is now coming into play in data analytics. The first part of that, though, is that you actually have to train the AI algorithm to count things and to do it accurately and to identify things or categorize whether it's power lines or substations or trees or dolphins or waste in the ocean. All those things have to be, before the AI can take over, it has to be trained, and that means there's a lot of humans involved. Also, even if you do AI, you still have to do quality control, and you still have to pull out pieces of information and go back and say, did that AI work as it was supposed to? Did it categorize I don't know, if we take Andrew Forrest as an example, did it categorize the pieces of plastic in the ocean as pieces of plastic, or were they dorsal fins of dolphins? So you always have QC in the background. And also there are some things that can't be done by AI because there's too many influencing factors. So one of the things Australian Spatial Analytics does is provide that sort of service of being a QC platform for people who might be using AI. We're certainly also looking at developing our own AI solutions for particular issues within our community. I mean, I think the interesting point about it all, though, with Australian Spatial Analytics, firstly, 3/4 of all our staff are on the spectrum. We have 22 staff at the moment, which we're only 12 months old and growing, extremely fast. The statistics around people on the spectrum and unemployment is quite sad in the fact that, they're extremely overrepresented in the unemployment area. They're 4 times more likely not to have a job. And the jobs that people on the spectrum are really good at are often done overseas now. Australia exports up to $1 billion a year worth of data analytics overseas every year. All your governments, whether it's departments related to main roads, whether it's departments related to national parks, etc., most of the data is exported overseas, crunched overseas and sent back. We're trying to change that paradigm by saying, hey, we have this large cohort of people who are extremely capable of doing the work, sitting here unemployed, who'd love to do it. They're better, they're faster, they're quicker, and overall more productive in doing data analytics. So that...
Just step in there. Hey, a secret intelligence organisation have 5 eyes, so you can't spy on your own people, but you can get one of the other members of the 5 eyes to spy on you. So we've got these privacy laws. You think this data analytical stuff's been sent out of Australia to go overseas, so it doesn't come under Australian privacy laws and legislation, and then they can do what they want with data mining in another foreign country?
I probably don't have an answer to that, Jeff, in terms of why it's sent overseas. Most of the information we're coming across is that it's just so much cheaper in the short term, when you just look at the dollars per hour to send it overseas. But when you get to data security, that's a whole different matter. If you're it doesn't matter where you're sending it to, even if it's to a friendly country, because there's more links in the chain, there's more potential for weaknesses. And I think
I agree with
COVID has highlighted that issue. And we know of some major Australian corporates who we're talking to, as well as some government organisations that are actively saying, we can no longer send this data overseas. How do we get it done in this country? Of course, it's not just data analytics, it's whether you're making motor cars or fridges or timber or whatever. We're fast finding out our capacity internally or nationally is a lot weaker than we thought. So even if people want to bring data analytics back onshore, there's not as many organisations available to do that work. So we put up our hand and said, hey, we can do the work. And more importantly, you can bring it back and meet your social obligations at the same time. ASA is a registered social business. It's also a registered DGR1 charity. And it enables organisations, be they corporate or government, to meet their social procurement obligations, because as we all know, most government departments have a social procurement strategy or desire, yet it's hard to achieve those social procurement targets if there's nobody for you to buy from. So we're actively saying we are building a social business that you can now purchase from.
And I hear a lot of parents from who've got adult kids who are on the autism are just really grateful that their children have got an opportunity to be working, and that they really seem to be enjoying, and being happy to be involved, because if you're analyzing data and there's a cause for it and you have that buy-in, it's much more interesting than when it gets subcontracted out and you actually have no relationship to it at all.
Oh, totally agree. And one of the things that we're really structuring ASA for is to be a training ground for the future coders, the future IT professionals, because as it's like in any industry, if you don't have where are the apprentices? Where do they start from? If you don't have that first job, that first introduction to the field, how do you get the higher order skills? How do you build that? A lot of that is missing in this country. And what ASA is aiming to do is to be that opportunity to build those first generation skills, so that corporates, if they are going to hire new data analysts or whatever, there's actually someone like ASA they can come to and say, look, we're looking to fill these positions. Have you got anybody? And certainly this is where, Jeff, you were talking about, dreaming the new dream. Most companies, when they get staff on board, they train them. They don't want them headhunted by another company. We're actually different. We want them headhunted by another company, because then we can create another job for another young person to come through and learn and move through. And that's the difference between, in some respects, a social business and a mainstream business. You invest a lot of time and money training people. You don't want to lose your best people. We do. We want to lose our best people into higher order jobs in the IT field. So we're that training ground in a real world environment, where our young people brush up against corporates, and I don't intend to name who we're working with because I don't have their permission, but we have some large corporates we're working with, and we're certainly saying to them, when your IT department, whatever, needs people, talk to us. We're happy to move people through, because our reason for being is different. And business is more than just profit, and we're aiming to be profitable. By the way, it's not. We're not aiming to be a charity. We're aiming to be profitable, and what we do with our profits is different. But we're aiming to be profitable. But we're also aiming to be socially positive.
Well, I have to say, you might want to knock on the door of tolls. I mean, the tolls were sold to the Japanese Postal Service, and they amalgamated all the accounting systems and IT with all their different subsidiaries, outsourced it to India, and of course, they got hit with a ransom demand of $76 million, and they said, no, we're not paying it. It cost them over $260 million in lost revenue and rebuilding their whole system. So, I mean, that's a great incentive for you to go knocking on the doors of corporates and say, excuse me, how about we move all this stuff back to Australia?
Oh, totally agree. Data security is now starting to be more highlighted. The world's more connected. So, and that's a good thing at times, but it brings with it some things that aren't good. So you've got to have, some checks and balances. I suppose we're not shy about saying we want to bring work back onshore. As we had some work done by a consulting firm, a large multinational consulting firm, and we know over $1.1 billion of Australian money every year is exported overseas to do data analysis every year. And that can be anything from pavement detection on your main roads through to, power lines. It's done overseas. They might be Australian registered companies, but they're only the shop front.
Right.
Whereas we employ local people. Our ambition is that there will be an ASA data hub in every state, at a minimum one data hub employing people on the spectrum. And as I said, we're building back better. We're building a different organisation that says, hey, COVID has shown that sometimes shipping stuff overseas doesn't work. If we're going to build back companies in this country, let's build back better. Let's build back companies that actually meet what you need as a service obligation, but also do some other things for our community. And it's not just ASA. The opportunities abound in this country of how we can do things.
Well, we saw that.
That's what I find interesting is Alex, you seem to really specialize on creating opportunities for segments of society that society is normally given up on, sort of like migrants, refugees, and the homeless people. So you were just saying that it's The Big Issue, which is a magazine that's sold on the street by homeless people, and they write and they edit and they contribute to it as well, that has just celebrated 25 years of being founded, and you were involved with it right straight from the start.
Yes. In fact, I was talking to our initial editor 2 days ago saying, 25 years ago, we stood on the steps of Flinders Street Station and launched Australia's newest magazine. And I think many of your listeners, or most of your listeners, would be familiar with The Big Issue. But basically, it's a magazine sold on the streets right across Australia by homeless people. Homeless people, when they sell the magazine, there you go. There's a little bit of a photo of one of our vendors. Keep 50% of the sale, the price of the magazine for themselves, and the other 50% goes back to The Big Issue, which uses those funds to, obviously publish the magazine, to print the magazine, to distribute the magazine, as well as, I suppose, keep financially afloat. The Big Issue is a DGR1 registered charity. It has lots of news and views and opinions that are well balanced. It's truly an independent magazine. It's not owned by some corporate somewhere else. It's actually run by a community board in Melbourne, who, and I must say, I must give a big shout out to the chairman of that board, who's Sonia Clancy, who does a fantastic job of keeping a magazine front and centre of dealing with and supporting homeless people in this country. And they're all volunteers. But it's a business, it's a social business that makes its own money. It provides jobs for, over 1,000 people a week who make their ends meet by selling the Big Issue magazine on the streets. If you haven't read it before, go and buy one when you see when you see a vendor on the street. The interesting thing about the Big Issue, and it goes when you talk about ASA or anything else that I'm involved with, it upended the paradigm about homeless people. What it said was, homeless people aren't people who are helpless. They're people who may need assistance at this point in time, but also homeless people can actually be front and centre of a good business. They're not the recipients of largesse, but rather they can be a critical part of success. So it builds from a strength model, saying, what are the strengths of homeless people? And we realised they were on the streets and said, well, if they're on the streets, how can we use that as a positive, not as a negative? So it's turning something 180 degrees and saying, okay, how do we use and get people's situation to be a positive, not a negative? It's the same with ASA. We're saying, okay, maybe people on the spectrum aren't going to do some jobs, but you know what? There's some real strengths we can build on. And if we build a business around people's strengths, it will work. The Big Issue works because it's built around the strengths of homeless people. Many homeless people are really up for a chat. Many homeless people sort of know everybody that goes past them because they're on the street all the time. So they can build relationships.
And that's what I've heard as well. Is Alex? Sorry to interrupt, but I'm just busting to people that I know who work in the city. They make friends with being able to, number one, for the homeless person, they're not begging. They're actually they say to me proudly, "I've got a job," because I used to go out on the van to Ipswich, and they would tell us, oh, this day I'm going to go and do my job, and they were so proud because as you can imagine, with a homeless person, they generally don't have a job. So having a job is just gives them that self-respect. And then from friends I know who work in the city, they just actually really look forward to buying the issue and having a chat with their favorite local vendor. And I still see people who've been doing it for 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years, and then sometimes just reading about people that have been involved in the team, and it just gives them so much. And they're very creative as well. Actually, it's very interesting.
I could tell you some stories about how creative people can be. I think you bring up a really good point though, Julia. The one thing about the Big Issue, and even with ASA and other businesses that I'm involved with, is firstly, the Big Issue creates a dignified exchange. You're not begging and saying, please give me money. What the Big Issue does is allows a person to say, I have got something of value I want to exchange with you that you have of something of value. Both those exchanges benefit each person's life. I get to read a magazine that gives me news and opinion that maybe rattles my cage at sometimes or is different from the mainstream media. And that's of value to me. And I can exchange that for money to the homeless person who values that, because you know what? Then they can go and use that money for what their needs are in their life. And that dignified exchange is really important. The Big Issue is not a pity purchase. We've never wanted it to be a pity purchase and say, well, just give us money and we'll give you this magazine. It's like, no, it's a dignified exchange. It's a magazine, quality magazine with different news and opinions that you'll get anywhere else. It has news and views from people on the streets themselves, from many of our social commentators, etc. So I think you bring up a good point. It changes the relationship. I mean, who hasn't, been confronted by beggars in the street and going, well, do I give them money? Do I not give them money? I gave to the last person. How much do I give? It really creates a meaningful relationship between two people.
So tell us, Alex, how did you actually get in? How was it actually set up? Because it's there now, but before it wasn't there. So it was a paradigm shift, like you say.
It was a major paradigm shift. It was a major paradigm shift because, firstly, we built a business around homeless people. We actually, think about it. We said homeless people are valuable. They're not people you give money to. These are people that are capable of creating their own futures if they have a vehicle to do that. A lot of people on the streets have an organic disorder and will probably never work for somebody else. That's just not going to happen for them because, they might go up and down. They might have issues that prevent them from working in a socially orientated workplace. So, this creates a business paradigm that they can participate in at their level. Whether it's I can do 2 days of work a week, or I can do mornings, or I'm only happy to do, 1 day a week, or whatever it is. People have a choice in their life, and a lot of those people need those choices and to take that control back of their own lives. And a lot of people have moved from the big issue into other jobs, into other ways of making a living, etc., or just using the magazine to make ends meet. So when we started, we knew it couldn't be like a normal corporate. It was never going to make, oodles of money. So it was set up as a social business. It was set up by the Body Shop and the two partners in the Body Shop in Australia, which was two fellows called Barry and Graham, who are fantastic people, who saw that the opportunity to do some good was there. One of the critical elements that the Body Shop did in those early days was you need a place for homeless people to go to pick up the magazines to sell. And all Body Shop stores in Australia, where there was a vendor, distributed the magazine. So we were able to go and send out the magazine to Body Shop stores like you do, soap or shampoo or whatever else you were selling. We distributed Body Shop big issue magazines through those stores, and the homeless people could go into the stores and pick up their magazine. That was really important. And if you think about it, corporates can play roles like that in Australia all over the place. How do they become vehicles for change? Doesn't mean they own the product or whatever, but they can become vehicles for change. And it was to be commended of the two partners in the business in those days that they saw the value of doing that. It was set up as a community board. It's still a community board. It said everybody who works on the big issue board are volunteers. They come from all walks of life. They're people who are dedicated to making a change in our community. It was hard in the early days because we were doing something nobody else was done. We were breaking the welfare mold. We were saying people are capable of creating their own futures if they're given the vehicle to do that. There was lots of debates, lots of discussions with welfare agencies, etc. Some agencies refused to send homeless people to us or refer people to us because we were breaking the mold. It was more like you're supposed to be helping homeless people. You're not supposed to be making them your business. It was tough.
They didn't trust you.
Oh yeah, there was, there was a degree of, I don't know if these people are true to their word, but 25 years later, the body shop's still involved, the community board's still involved. I mean, I'm still a member. I think a lot of people who get touched by the big issue tend to stay around.
Absolutely. And when you were working at the body shop itself, I mean, you know, I remember that as well in the UK. You were breaking paradigms because you were setting up an ethical supply chain. You know, that was what certainly the youth wanted at the time. Did you find yourself going up against a lot of vested interests then?
Oh, certainly. Well, my first job in the body shop, funnily enough, was a program called Trade Not Aid. And Anita Roddick, when she started the body shop, really wanted to find a way to work directly with farmers and cut out all the, because farmers, and even to this day, often get the lowest price. Go and talk to a few dairy farmers. The lowest price for their product. And there's a lot of middlemen. And Anita had set out in the early days to say, how do we cut out the middleman? How do we buy shea butter direct from someone in Africa? How do we buy, you know, tea tree oil direct from Indigenous people in Australia? How do we buy, you know, coconut oil direct from people in Samoa? Rather than, you know, having aggregators in different areas who then sell it onto a wholesaler, who then sells it onto a producer, who then sells it onto the body shop. Because in all of that transactions, in all of that, the farmer has to lose a bit of their payment. So, you know, the body shop really worked, and the scheme we're talking about was Trade Not Aid. Now, Anita set that up probably about 35 years ago, and really went hard at that. And I mean, it's really interesting when you see all the, you know, to me anyway, because I came from that field, to see all the farm gate opportunities to purchase now over the web. You know, all these farmers being able to sell direct to the consumer because, and why do they say it? A, we understand the consumer, we understand what they want, and we also get a better price. You know, 35 years ago, the internet didn't exist. You couldn't sell direct like that. There was a whole system that worked, I suppose, and against or at least fed off the farmer. Now, you know, those opportunities for farmers are there through the internet to have that direct consumer interface. And I mean, I just love it. I just watch it and I just go, all power to people. It allows both sides of the equation, the consumer to get a better, quicker, more direct product, to have a relationship with the farmer, and on the flip side of that, the farmer to have a relationship with their consumer, understand what they want, when they want it, how much they're prepared to pay, and everybody benefits. That's one of the real benefits of the internet.
Well, they get their cash flow quicker too, don't they?
Beg your pardon, sorry, Jeff?
They get their cash flow quicker too.
Well, yeah, they get their cash flow quicker. You know, it's not held in trust here, and then it moves to there, and then I'll pay you next month, and you know, it really makes a real difference. And you know, as I was saying, I grow avocados myself, and I know being able to sell direct to the consumer, I can sell a better quality product because I don't have to, you know, cut corners and pack the way somebody else wants, etc. It's an absolute boon.
So for you, you've got the internet and you've got the capability for taking payments. Your only concern really would be your transportation and distribution network.
Yeah, totally. And you know, the transportation and distribution, and I suppose you get to control who you sell to. I sell locally. So in other words, I don't want to distribute to Melbourne markets. I love my, you know, I've got family in Melbourne. I love them dearly and all that sort of stuff. But I don't need to pay the price of shipping all the way to Melbourne. I can develop a local market that will take my product. A, I'm cutting down food miles. B, people are getting a fresher product. It's not in cold storage. I'm not creating, you know, a vast carbon footprint. There's a whole lot of opportunity in that, and I think that the markets themselves become more resilient. You know, your communities become more resilient. You know, I won't say gone are the days of shipping all the way to Melbourne, because that's not true. We do ship products around all the place, not me personally, but there's still vast, you know, distribution networks out there. But, you know, you do get to control where you need to go and where you need to sell, because you don't need to sell as much because you're getting a better price.
That's certainly the case now, Alex, but I'm actually quite interested, you know, when you did start out with Body Shop, and at the time farmers would have probably been locked into contracts to sell, you know, at least, I don't know, normally what, 80% or 75% of the production. And, you know, how did you convince them, you know, being the new kid on the block, how do you convince them to, you know, open up some of their produce for you or switch to supplying the Body Shop?
You've got to think about how the system works. And the system works where you have individual farmers and then you have an aggregator, you know, somebody who buys off all the little farms, aggregates that into, you know, particularly in the developing world. And, you know, Body Shop particularly worked in the developing world, Africa, South Asia, the Pacific, Caribbean, where it's mainly small scale farmers. You know, someone grew coconuts or bananas or Brazil nuts or whatever. No, there's no really generally large scale farms. So somebody acted as the aggregator of getting all those farm and buying off all those farms, aggregating the product and sending it off to a wholesale market. What we were really engaged with and really worked hard on was to actually assist, and we used to fund both through pre-purchase agreements as well as direct funding, cooperatives. And Jeff, you kicked off tonight with really talking about cooperatives in the early days of, you know, business. We were going back to square one, where we would work with coconut farmers in the South Pacific and assist them to create cooperatives that they owned and controlled, that were basically the aggregators. So therefore, they could then, by aggregating through a cooperative that they owned and controlled, sell to markets. Because, you know, when you're let's say we needed, you know, 500 tons of coconut oil, you didn't want to talk to 2,500 coconut farmers and get 2,500 invoices. You want one invoice for that bulk product. So by working at a strategic level, what we worked to do was assist those farmers self-organise through a cooperative where they would aggregate and then you would buy off that cooperative. And they're great ways for people, for small-scale farmers to do things. In the Sunshine Coast hinterland where I am, you know, you do have some dairy farmers who are, you know, developing their own cooperatives to aggregate product to meet larger markets. Again, they're in control of the aggregation of that product through a cooperative. They get a better price, and also the purchaser, and, you know, like the end customer does have a say in this, the buyer has to deal with one group, not, you know, 50 or whatever. So that's how we worked. We really worked on how do you create cooperatives, and we did cooperatives in Zambia around, you know, honey production, South Pacific around coconut oil, you know, shea farmers in Ghana, etc., where we helped establish cooperatives that could then work with the small farmers. So that's kind of the model there that we used.
Yeah, that's interesting. So if anybody's looking to set up a cooperative, they should have a chat to you, because you'd know which ones work, which ones don't, or what they need to make it work.
I have seen a few, and like a cooperative well set up will last a really, really long time. They're great vehicles for small farmers to work together. I mean, when you look at the wheat marketing board, the wool board, the barley board, all of those, really what they are is they're farmer cooperatives that have got really large. But it allows farmers, as long as they don't corporatize. I mean, as I said, when Jeff and I were talking earlier, we're talking about how AMP, that's, mutual society, as it was set up by the members for the benefit of the members. And it became corporatized, and I think there's probably been a bit of mission drift there.
Well, the same thing happened with the Commonwealth Bank too, didn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah.
And the Australian Wheat Board.
There is numerous examples of where things were set up as cooperatives. They drifted into corporate world, and I'm not sure if you're aware, but like there's a whole doctrine in the corporate world of the primacy of the shareholder. That the CEO and the staff and the board are really beholden to fulfilling the wishes of the shareholders, which is a financial return in general. That's been the general model that's operated for a long time. I mean, it's really interesting on why that model became into being for people who are not aware. But basically, when Henry Ford started to really produce a lot of Model Ts and really started to make a lot of money, he decided that he would invest in his workers, and he wanted to set up child care facilities and facilities for the workers' children, and pay for it out of the accounts of Ford. The Dodge brothers, which is funny, but the Dodge brothers were major shareholders in Ford, and they basically took him to court and said, no, you're not giving away our money. We're the shareholders, or the major shareholders, or one of the major shareholders. We want the money, and we don't want you to do that. And Henry Ford lost. And from that day forward, the primacy of shareholders has been set. And that's never really been challenged till probably recent times, where people are saying, hey, wait a minute, what about the workers? What about the community? What about the environment? And sure, shareholders are important, but they're not everything. So there's a whole drift there.
Yeah. So that actually leads me to ask you about, your work with Indigenous communities, because I know that you're doing quite a lot. You've been active in that space, but presumably there as well, because of the community, you couldn't use a normal profit or shareholder model to do that kind of stuff.
No, I think you're right. Social enterprise lends itself really well to Indigenous communities, not just here in Australia, but worldwide, where there is a much greater emphasis on community support and community engagement. And I'm not just talking about family. I'm talking about, the broader community as well as family. I mean, it goes to the whole South Pacific, where you have, your whole concept of village debt. Same in Africa. That, the village that you come from, where you come from, is very important. And Indigenous communities in Australia have a real affinity for their communities. And I think, probably the broader Australian public is just starting to cotton on to how important that is. So yeah, we're working to establish with traditional owners as key drivers and participants some social enterprises, and make sure that, I suppose, they live in two worlds. I mean, it is social enterprise. It has a social mission, but it has to be economically sustainable. You can't live off grants. You can't live off largesse. It's bad for the soul eventually. So how do you become self-directive? And we think that by building social enterprise with communities, people can meet their social obligation and also get the real pride and joy that comes out of saying, hey, you know, we've done this ourselves. I mean, one of the companies I started many years ago, I worked with young people coming out of the secure facilities, and we set up a company called Speak Out, and we made cutting edge fashion for people, for young people. And it was really interesting because some of our designs went worldwide. And I remember in particular, we had a large order from Switzerland for a particular design of T-shirt we'd done and a particular graphic on it. And two of the young people that had come out of facility were printing up the labels on the boxes and putting them on the boxes to be dispatched that afternoon. And they were like, I can't believe somebody in Switzerland wants to buy what I've made. And it was nothing about the money. It was about the pride that comes from saying somebody wants to pay full price for something that I've made. Absolutely amazing. And I think that's half of business. It's not about the money. It's about the pride in actually making and selling something that somebody wants to buy from you. That dignified exchange we talked about was a big issue.
Just changing there, tweaking it. I remember watching a cable network from America with Business Unusual, and they were interviewing this marketing consultant, and he'd set up shop over in Hong Kong, and he had all these Generation X and Ys and all that stuff going through Asia, looking for the next product that he could then take to America and market it and to the big corporations to distribute it. Anyway, this young fella would always keep coming in, seeing him about these different products. And this marketing guy said, how can I trust you? Every time you come here, you ran Reeboks last time. Now you're wearing Adidas. Yeah. You have a shirt that has Nike. Next time it's Admiral. You know, like, how do I know? And the young fella said, mate, I'm the product.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. You know, there is a whole thing about forget the product and think about the person that it represents. You know, like we used to talk about with Body Shop. You know, what happens when you pull a lipstick out of your purse or out of your bag? It says something about you, you know, and when a person pulled a Body Shop lipstick out of their bag, it said something about them as a person. It wasn't about the color red or anything like that. It was about I buy Body Shop, and that stands for something. That's who I am. Really important Alex, branding stuff.
Yeah. And I think that was what I was thinking when I was listening to both of you is, you know, we're kind of used to Shark Tank and Trump, The Apprentice with completely different emphasis, you know, convince me and how you're going to make money, and I might give you some money and you'll be so successful if you get some of my money. And that's, you know, just but listening to you, you know, it's just exactly the opposite paradigm and perspective. You're, you know, really looking for opportunities to encourage these people that they can be creative and, you know, and prove themselves.
Oh, look, people amaze me, some of the business ideas they have, young people, etc. But, you know, you go to a really important point. One of the things that Body Shop did, and you know, even with ASA, if I bring it into the contemporary field now, what we try and do, and what we tried to do then and what we're trying to do now, is having an emotional connection with the customer. It's not just about the physical product or service that you're offering. It's about, hey, we work with ASA. You know, the product's just as good as any other product, but this says something about us as an organisation, that we work with these people because we get more than just the service. again with the body shop, you've got more than just the lipstick. You knew that, you know, the beeswax in that lipstick we support. We sourced from a cooperative we'd set up in Zambia with local women. So every time, you know, when you see ASA or Body Shop or some of the other businesses I'm involved with, the brand says something more than the product itself or service itself. It says something about you, not about the product or the service. And that's what we aim to do all the time.
Ethical and two-way exchange, yeah.
Yeah. And
Jeff, any more? Sorry. Jeff, any more?
No, anyway.
Okay, so I think, first of all, what's ASA stand for? I just want to get that one.
Australian Spatial Analytics.
Okay, that's right. You said that at the beginning. Now then, I come to you with a great idea. You look at it and think, oh my God. So what happens now? Do you go and set up a business plan, or do you go there and say, okay, we need to get some funding? How do we get this project off the ground? Where do we go get premises?
My first question to you, Jeff, would be, what do you want to do? Why have you come? Because you already know why you're there. You know, I want to make it real, or I just thought it was a good idea, or I'm looking for money, or I'm looking for partners, or I want somebody to tell me it's good or bad. Firstly, I try and figure out, you know, why have you come? You know, let's clarify that. And then, you know, we start just pulling it apart a little bit, just as a back of the envelope, just pull it apart. And because we're always looking for, you know, why is it different? What's your social impact going to be? We do a back of the envelope. You know, what do you think your social impact's going to be? I'm not going to talk to you if you're there to make money. If you say, oh, I want to make this, and you know, I'm going to do it, that's not what we're there for. You know, I need to hear from you what you figured the social impact will be, but also I'm listening for how do you think this thing will work in the market? And then we start talking about, okay, well, where to from here? What research have you done? You know, how do we do more of that? What are you prepared to put in? And I don't mean dollars. I mean, money is, to me, is usually the last thing I want to talk about. Really, it's just pulling it apart. And I suppose I always go in with a really positive attitude, not an attitude of, oh God, here comes another person with a damn idea they think's great. If it's a bad idea, I want you to come to me eventually and say, actually, it was a good idea, but it's a bad business. You know, because most things are good ideas, they just might be bad businesses. You know, you might come with a better mousetrap, but you can say, well, that's great, but the old ones still work well and everyone's used to them, so why are they going to buy yours? Yeah. Even if it works better. Old habits die hard. So if it's a bad idea, I want you to eventually come to that decision. We you know, then look at, if it looks, hey, this might stack up, then I'd probably try and reach out to somebody who can work one-on-one with you and just start having a chat about that, about how can we make this work, or how can you make this work? But again, it's about social business. If you've got a new idea for a potato chip that's really going to take off and you're going to make a fortune, good on you. If we talk it through and say, yep, this will make a lot of money, Jeff, and that's what you want to do, that's great. But that's not what we're in business for. Now, we actually do a whole process of social impact assessment. Where do you think the impacts will be? Why do you think they'll be there? Who's the impact with? How's it sustainable? Just like the same questions around finance. Where are you getting the money? How much are you going to sell it for? What's the profit margin? Etc. So what we do with money and go through those questions, we almost transfer and say, okay, around the social sphere, how do those things stack up as well?
So if you're talking about potatoes, it'd be like Simplot coming in and taking over our organisations to buy the potatoes. So you'd be looking at going to the Lockyer or Laidley Valleys just out of Brisbane there to see if you can get farmers there to come together to grow potatoes to set up a cooperative.
Yeah, and if that's what people want to do, and you know, it's such a broad question, but I'm currently working on products as broad as probably things you haven't heard of. We're working with an Indigenous group at the moment, and we've set up a company called Fertilizer, where we're turning feral pigs into biostimulants for the agricultural market. And, you know, the thing we're looking at mostly is the social impact of removal of feral pigs, and how do people in really isolated communities have a business that they can work around. Through to we're looking at some tourism ventures, through to how do you replant coral on the Great Barrier Reef. There is an enormous opportunity for businesses in this country. I mean, and I know we're probably out of time, but probably where I would leave this whole discussion, and I love your question, but one of the things that I'm very passionate about is the fact that we can all start businesses. They don't have to be large. They don't even have to make money. They can be barter systems. But we've been trained as people to get a job. You know, when I went to school, if the teacher wanted to, you know, be mean to you, they'd say, who'd give you a job? You know, nobody through my whole, and I might be older than both of you, but through my whole schooling existence, I've got 3 kids and I always talk to them about it. Did any teacher ever ask you, what business do you think you'd start? Our whole system is geared to training workers. It's not geared to training entrepreneurs. Unless you've got an entrepreneurial family, you generally won't start a business. And my thought for today, if we're talking about dreaming the new dream, is it can start with you. Every listener out there can start their own business, and just start practicing of looking for problems, because every business is exactly the same. Every business has one core ingredient, that's problem solving at a profit. That's all a business is. You know, Body Shop was really good. If you had a hot date Saturday night, we could make you look and smell good. We solved your problem. You know, every business is the same. If you want to grow better crops, we'll invent a fertilizer. You know, if you want to go on holidays, we'll provide a place for you. Every business is the same. You look for problems and say, how can I solve it? And every person is capable of that. And you can dream your own dream, and you can start your own business. And I just encourage every Australian to really think about it, because that's how we build back better. That's how we create the new dream, is starting micro business. It doesn't have to be flash. You know, I remember sitting next to a fellow on a plane, and this many years ago, and I was chatting to him, and he said he'd just been up to Brisbane. He was going back to Adelaide, and I said, what do you do? He said, well, and he was only about, I reckon he would have been 18, 19. And I said, what do you do? And he said, I've started a business. I said, well, what's the business? He said, do you think it's strange? And I said, no. He said, well, I breed crickets. And I said, well, really, you breed crickets? He said, yeah, I can't get enough of them. He said, because everybody in Australia, or not everybody, but a lot of people are starting to have lizards and snakes and stuff in aquariums. He said, and they feed them crickets. He said, they need to buy them. And he said, I've always loved cricket, so I grow them. And he'd come to Brisbane to hire a new employee. So you can make a business out of anything.
Wow, that's great, Alex. That's really inspiring. Thank you very much. You know, I really appreciated finding out about how these social enterprises are, you know, making a difference and solving problems. And I really encourage our audience, get in touch with Alex McDonald at White Box Enterprises if you want to make a difference. Thank you very much for joining us on the show.
Take care, Julia, Jeff, and listeners. Have a grand evening.
Brilliant.